Hi, welcome to Think Human. I'm Chris, and in this video I want to talk about 3 moral and ethical dilemmas to sort of practice moral reasoning and to think about good or evil or bad or wrong and how these things aren't always clear and obvious. So the first story that we start with is a shipping accident. There's an accident on a ship. Some people drown, but 4 people make it on a life raft. 3 of these 4 people are grown, experienced adults in their 30s and 40s. They all have families, children who love them, loving wives. They are active members of the community, and one of them is an orphan, the 17-year-old boy who has no connections, has no family, no one even pretty much knows that he exists. So they're on this life raft floating in the ocean. They have a little bit of rations, so they survive for about a week and a half. They distribute it amongst themselves and they manage to survive. They find out that in the place that they're at, they can't really do any fishing, so they're pretty much limited in the food they have and they don't have much time. After this week and a half, this orphan, this kid, has an infection, so the kid is dying and looking worse and worse every day. They think he won't make it longer unless they get help in a few days. They talk about it and they're all desperate and hungry, and the older men talk amongst themselves that if help doesn't arrive in a few days, they will kill the kid and eat him. Few days pass, the kid is worse and worse, there is no help in sight. So they use one of the tools in the emergency box that they had and they kill the child, the orphan, in his sleep. They kill the kid and eat him, and they manage to survive on the flesh of this 17-year-old orphan for about a week. And then a shipping boat finds them and gets them back to mainland to safety. Now, after that there was a court case and these men were all found guilty of murder and cannibalism, and exact sentence I don't remember, but they were found guilty. Now, this is interesting to think about this situation. It's really difficult to imagine what people would do in such desperation when there's really no help in sight. Everybody's starving. On one hand, this kid was dying anyway, so if they couldn't find help in a few days, that kid would have been dead. Arguably, that kid wouldn't have made it for a week longer until the shipping boat arrived. So these men, this is a question of how many lives are possible to save. So these 3 men all had families, all had communities around them. This orphan had nothing. Of course, on the other hand, who is anyone to judge any human being? All lives should be equally valuable. Well, if all lives are equally valuable, then it's still a good outcome, because 3 lives are saved versus 1 life. Although, of course, the potential of the 17-year-old orphan, who known what great things this orphan would have done in the world. So, of course, in that way it is murder. But again, this man thought about it. I'm sure it wasn't an easy decision to make, but they did something for their survival, and in turn for that, they continued their lives for decades with their loving families and communities. Well, I guess they spent some time in jail, but they survived. So it's up to you to think if what they did is right or wrong. So the second story would be about the car manufacturer. And this car manufacturer produced a new model of cars. It was in the 1970s, around that time, and they produced a new model. However, there was one flaw with this new model. Every time that the cars got in a front-end collision, the driver and the passenger died. There was some piece of the car that when a front-end crash happened, a piece of the car just collapsed into the passenger, into the driver, killing them pretty much in most cases of these front-end accidents happened. So the car company looked at this situation and they made calculations and evaluated the outcomes. What would they need to do? And in fact, they did have a solution. They knew exactly how to fix it, how to replace it. But they made a choice to actually not fix the cars, because the cost of calling back all of these cars and replacing the parts versus the cost of letting people die and paying for the settlements and their funerals and their grieving husbands or wives or whatever, that amount of money was less than if they were to call back all the cars and replace the parts. So they made a conscious choice as a company to let people die because it was less expensive than to actually save lives and replace the parts of all of these cars. This is interesting to think about, the mentality of corporations, maximizing profit and all of these things. I mean, in this case, it's not really difficult to think what is good or bad. They just wanted to maximize profit and they did it in a ruthless way. So the final story is a hypothetical scenario. This is not something that actually happened. So imagine that you go into a city, a town that has 10,000 people, and this town is flourishing, a beautiful place. It has all the parks, all the institutions, beautiful hospitals, beautiful schools. People have jobs. People are fulfilled and happy in this town. They have loving families, they have strong community around them. It's the best place to live. A matter of fact, it's the happiest town on the planet. So you walk around this town and you notice at the edge of the town, in one building, you look, there's a window to the basement, and you see through the basement that inside the basement there's a 9-year-old girl that's chained up and just starving, miserable, crying in the basement of this building outside the town. Now, you know this, you were told that the suffering of this 9-year-old child is what is needed for the entire population of this town to be happy and fulfilled. These 10,000 people who are living wonderful lives, fulfilled lives, and the only way that they could do it somehow is that this 9-year-old girl must suffer. It's easy to have emotional responses, but to think about that in these 10,000 people in this town, there are many, many 9-year-old girls who are living a happy, wonderful life. 9-year-old boys, 10-year-old girls and boys, children, parents, mothers, cousins, elders, grandparents, everyone living a happy, beautiful life at the expense and cost of this 9-year-old girl suffering. Now, if you wanted to think in this kind of utilitarian view that the most lives, the most possible happiness is what counts, then you would leave the girl as it is. But on an emotional kind of way, for me in this particular scenario, I would get the fucking girl out of there so fast, because that is profoundly messed up. One innocent child should not suffer like that, but then the entire town, including the hundreds or thousands of innocent children, would also start to suffer just like the rest of humanity, maybe even worse. So this is an interesting kind of thought experiment, and it's really messed up. In most cases, I would say that the most lives saved is the best, like in the trolley experiment, or the most happiness possible is the best possible outcome, but that would just be an ugly thing to base well-being and happiness upon. And now I don't remember if in the thought experiment, if the town citizens were aware of it or not. That's also an interesting thing to think about. But think about, would this change in any way if instead of the 9-year-old girl there was a 20-year-old woman or a 20-year-old man or some kind of an old person? Would it change anyway? So this is all food for thought, I think, and I would be really interested to hear what your responses to this ethical moral dilemmas would be. So if you have thoughts about this, what thoughts you have, please share them in the comments. And of course, thank you so much for watching, and take care.